Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. Season obviously over for the Packers. We're going to have plenty of content during the offseason. Still kind of flirting with the idea of doing some live play-by-play and reaction streams throughout the rest of the postseason. I know there's two on Saturday, Chiefs-Texans and Lions-Washington, and then Sunday you have the other two. Baltimore-Buffalo is going to be a doozy. That feels like if they were in opposite conferences, that could be a Super Bowl matchup. And then you also have Philadelphia taking on the LA Rams. This is an off-season video for the Packers, kind of current with an interview that occurred earlier on Tuesday. Former Packers wide receiver Davante Adams, and kind of spinning the idea, spinning it around the block a little bit. You know, there's a lot of chatter right now around Green Bay and sort of the idea of, hey, what can they do this offseason? What can the Packers do this offseason? What do they need to do this offseason to sort of reload, bolster things up? Most of its key players are under contract through next season. There's some that, Josh Myers is a free agent, so Green Bay will have to figure out if they want to bring back their center that they've had at center for quite a few years now. There's names like Eric Wilson out there at linebacker, who's a great special teams player. There's names out there for Green Bay that they will have to address, but the main core guys are all under contract for next season. Again, you have guys like Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson who are extension eligible this offseason, but both under contract for the 2025 campaign. And so a lot of people are looking around wondering what Green Bay can do, what they need to do. They'll have cap space. They'll have a good amount of cap space, at least projection-wise right now, to go out and maybe make a couple of splash deals in free agency. And a lot of people are floating around the thought of whether or not Green Bay needs an alpha, a true number one wide receiver. I've brought it up in a couple of past videos, talking in Packer post games, and whether or not that's an avenue they should explore or not. And Davante Adams is certainly a very, very interesting name. And Adams appeared on the Up and Adams show earlier on Tuesday. That's Kay Adams' show. And the direct quote from Davante Adams, and Kay Adams, the host, was peppering Davante with questions about, his future. And he said he watched the Packer game, and it was the only playoff game he watched over the weekend. But it wasn't, he said, it just lined up, with being around the home and turning it on and watching it. And one of the quotes he had in the interview was, and this is Davante's words, and I quote, "It's looking like right now and he's talking about the Packers, they might need some receiver help in one way or the other. Maybe a veteran or something. We'll see." And of course, that sent Packers Twitter into a frenzy, in a good way for the most part, with people speculating, is Davante trying to hint at something? Is he just playing around? Obviously, he currently still is a New York Jet, but that is very, very likely to change as the offseason carries along in the months to come, I should say. And it poses a very interesting question. Could there potentially be a reunion on the table between Davante Adams and the Green Bay Packers? So I ask you what your thoughts are on the potential of getting Davante back in Green Bay, on what I would assume, if he's a free agent, if the Jets release him, would be a fairly short deal, like 2, maybe 3-year deal. He will be entering his age 32, 33 season. He turned 32 in December, and I'm all in on the reunion under one big condition, and it should be a fairly obvious one, and that is that if Green Bay does explore this path and they were to come to terms on a deal with Davante, that it comes via free agency and not a trade. That contract is still pretty bloated, and Davante is an incredible player, but it's a hefty contract that he has currently locked in with the New York Jets, and I don't know if you want to give up draft compensation to try to address your need, if Goody and company think that it is a need, that they need a number one wideout. But if Davante's cut loose by the Jets, like many believe he will be, then he's a free agent. And, it's free pickings for everyone to try to court him and get him to sign aboard with their squad. That's the route I would want to see Green Bay take. And if you look at this from a Jets perspective, quite frankly, a trade makes very little sense for them, and here's why. Davante Adams is out of guaranteed money. The team, the Jets, and Davante, when the trade was made, they let the 2025 and 2026 years in his contract just sit there. They didn't touch it. They didn't address it. And they did that for a reason. Davante has a cap hit of $38.3 million in 2025. And so the Jets can either ask for Davante to take a massive restructure, which if Aaron Rodgers is gone, Davante Adams is gone. He's not sticking around. And many people believe Aaron Rodgers won't be back with the Jets. So obviously, why would Davante re-ante up and pony up and stay with New York with, a huge question mark at quarterback? And the only reason he was traded to the Jets is to link up with Rodgers and try to turn around what was a very slow start to the season. And Tay produced. Tay put up big numbers for the Jets, but it didn't directly result to wins and losses. They had plenty of other issues. Obviously, they fired Robert Saleh before Davante ever arrived during the season. And so the Jets could go to Davante and try to bring up the idea of a restructure, but it'd have to be a big one. Again, his cap hit is $38.3 million for 2025 on his current deal. I don't think it even gets to that point. I don't think Rodgers is going to be back. I don't think Davante is going to be back. And so a trade for them makes little sense. They can just cut Davante loose with very little financial ramifications, and I do believe that's the route the Jets will take. And if he's a free agent, like I said, obviously it becomes fair game for everyone. And so the point is, it's very likely Davante isn't back on the Jets in 2025, and it's also very likely they just outright release him for financial savings purposes. And so Davante then becomes kind of the belle of the ball. He and T. Higgins would be the top two free agent wide receivers on the market, assuming there's no other huge names that get released. I know Tyreek Hill's name was another one brought up, but Miami's not releasing him. They would trade him, I would assume, before just outright releasing him if something comes to fruition with that. And so for Davante, would Green Bay actually become a realistic option? Obviously, there's familiarity. It's where he spent the bulk of his career, the prime of his career, all-pro caliber wide receiver. Certainly the numbers still reflect a wide receiver who's playing at an all-pro caliber level. Now the position is loaded, and it's Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, and there's a lot of names out there at wide receiver. But Davante Adams, you'd be foolish if you said he wasn't still like a top 10 wide receiver. I think you could make a case he's a top 6 or 7 wide receiver still in the NFL, but certainly nowhere past or farther back than the top 10. Like, he is still a true number 1 wide receiver, and there's absolutely no doubt about that. And by all accounts, when you kind of like peel back the layers of the onion on this one with setting up a potential reunion in Green Bay with Davante Adams, well, how did things end when they traded him to the Raiders? And it appeared to be on fine terms. There were initial reports that Davante thought the Packers lowballed him, and then after the trade was made a couple years ago when he was on the Raiders before the season had even started, he was asked many questions about the trade. And if you go back and look, Davante actually said the Packers offered more money than the Raiders did, but it was about more than that for him. Basically wanting to get back to the West Coast, raise his family on the West Coast, family in that area. The idea for him of playing with Derek Carr, his college quarterback at Fresno State, certainly played into it. And the Packers, essentially, once they knew they weren't going to get a deal done with Davante, they did right by him, trading him to the Raiders. That was the preferred destination for Davante. The Packers could have fielded offers from anyone, and maybe someone would have offered more draft compensation than what Green Bay received for Davante. But it's interesting. It's kind of funny how things can come full circle and work out. Green Bay did right by Davante. Apparently, Davante's words, offered more money than the Raiders, but it was about more than that. And the Rodgers element of it, not knowing what Rodgers' situation, whether or not he was going to come back for Green Bay, loomed large for Davante. He thought he could go to a team like the Raiders, play with his college quarterback, contend, and obviously that didn't work out. And he didn't want to, whether he directly said this or not, everyone knows he didn't want to be a part of what kind of looked like it could be a rebuild situation for the Packers. Anytime you talk about replacing a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, it's usually not a quick fix. And Green Bay, with 2 years of Jordan Love, have gone to the playoffs in both years, and they're 1-1 in the postseason. And I don't think many expected, especially in the first year, for Green Bay to go to the playoffs. And it's not a Jordan Love thing. It's just handing over the keys to anyone after you have Aaron Rodgers there for as long as he was. And they hand the keys over to Jordan Love. They get to the playoffs. They demolished Dallas 2 years ago and then hang in punch for punch. Quite frankly, I've said this before, should have beat San Francisco and didn't. But that was a hard thing to predict. And so Davante thought what was best for him was to go out to the West Coast, go to the Raiders, link up with his old college quarterback, and the Packers did right by basically giving him what his desired preference was to go to the Raiders. And if you circle back to now where Davante in the coming months likely to be released by the New York Jets, that certainly factors in. This didn't end on like a sour note. There was not a salty taste in the mouth of either side. Certainly there might have been, initially a couple of hard feelings, especially with those reports that some said Davante felt like the Packers lowballed him initially, at least, but everything seems to be okay relationship-wise. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the front office, LaFleur, with Davante. And so it's just very fascinating, if nothing else. And he confirmed too that Rodgers' future and sort of the murkiness with it at the time played into his decision to sort of want out of Green Bay at that moment, thinking it was best for his career. Now you look at this current structure of the Packers and you ask, is bringing in a guy is bringing in Davante Adams a fit? By the way, it's Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate all the support. Is getting 17 back in Green Bay, is it a fit for what this current team has, what this current team needs? How can anyone possibly say no? It's not whether or not you want Davante Adams, whether or not you like the idea of Davante Adams back in the mix with Green Bay. How can anyone say it's not a fit for where this team is, where they aspire to be, and a big current need, in my opinion, certainly, of needing that alpha, needing that number one wide receiver in the room? And that's not a knock on the guys they have in that wideout room. But Davante Adams he's in a different tier. He's in a different category. He's proved that throughout his career, and he's still doing that even at the age of 32. And I know there's some concern maybe with his age, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But if the question is it even a fit with this current roster construction and where they aspire to be? Absolutely, Davante Adams is a fit for the Green Bay Packers. The idea the last couple of years of, hey, we have a lot of different options. We have a lot of depth that will keep defenses guessing. Like who's going to get fed more this game? Is the game plan circulating around Christian Watson and Jaden Reed, or is it circulating around Romeo Doubs and Tucker Kraft? Oh, don't forget about Dontavian Wicks. And Luke Musgrave when he's healthy. Green Bay the last couple of years, and I would say it definitely had its really good moments, and then it had its not-so-good moments, but they went with more of an approach of, we're going to align what we believe is just a ton of depth at wide receiver, and let's see how the chips fall, and if it falls in our favor. Not having a Jamar Chase, not having a Justin Jefferson, not pursuing, an A.J. Brown, or trying to get not CeeDee Lamb specifically, but a CeeDee Lamb type receiver, either via draft, via trade, via free agency, whatever it is. They went with, I won't say they went quantity over quality, because they have really good quality wide receivers, again, in my opinion, but they went with quantity being the kind of be-all, end-all, that they wanted multiple different options in the passing game, and it worked certainly to an extent. But I think the time has come. If you had, truth serum to give to anyone in the front office, or even Matt LaFleur, and he was asked in his sort of end of the season press conference about getting number one wide receiver, and, he didn't, it was a coach speak answer by LaFleur, which was expected, and I don't blame him for that. But if you gave these guys truth serum, I think the overwhelming results would point towards them saying, and them being the front office personnel for the Packers and the coaching staff would say, yeah, it'd be nice to get an alpha back in here as a wide receiver one option. So I think Davante is a fit. And you look around the room right now, and I like what they have at wide receiver, but can anyone honestly say, let's go with the core four: Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks. Did any of those four take a gigantic leap forward this year? I think as the season started to unravel early on, Jaden Reed looked like he might emerge as a true number one wide receiver. And I do believe if you had a lie detector test hooked up to Matt LaFleur and Goody, that it would come up as truth, and maybe they would just admit it, that the preference would be amongst these four that maybe one or two do emerge as the go-to guy. And then Love has a go-to guy in crunch time. You need a big third down conversion. Well, I know this guy can get free on a quick hit slant, and I can go to him right away. I can go to him on a back shoulder ball near the sideline. In those crunch time big moments, it's nice to have a bevy and an array of options for a defense to have to worry about, but it might be better to have the guy, and maybe Green Bay thought one or two of those would emerge. I actually thought Christian Watson, when healthy this year, and he was healthy for most of the season, I thought he was really taking his game to the next level. Thought his route tree was expanding. He certainly wasn't just a deep ball threat for the Packers. They can use him in that orbit motion, that jet motion. But again, the targets didn't reflect that. The receptions didn't necessarily reflect that. And that's not a Christian Watson problem. It's really not anyone's problem. It just goes with the overriding theme that they were carrying out of, let's have as much depth as possible at wide receiver. And so I thought like Christian Watson got better. I thought Romeo Doubs was just, when he was in the lineup, he was that steady presence for the Packers at wide receiver. Jaden Reed is kind of the fireball. He's the exciting option for Green Bay. And then Wicks, I thought he would be similar to Doubs in terms of the steady, reliable presence. I thought the drops really kind of hindered his season. Some drops in bigger moments compared to some of his other drops. And I didn't expect maybe necessarily like a gigantic leap from Wicks, again, because I didn't know if the targets would necessarily be there. But none of these four guys took, in my opinion, and I'm not blaming them for it, that monstrous step where it's like, yes, they are the guy in this wide receiver room now. And I think Green Bay maybe craves that a little bit more than they did entering the season, thinking one or two of these guys might emerge as that, and it just didn't come to fruition. And now you're looking at a situation where Christian Watson's probably out to start next season. I'm talking about the regular season. Talking about a gruesome knee injury, torn ACL, potential other ligament damage there, and it happened late in this season. So you're talking about missing training camp, preseason, likely the start of the regular season. You won't have number 9 out there. Romeo Doubs, 2 concussions in an 8-9 week span is extremely scary. We all saw the scene of him leaving the field Sunday in Philadelphia, needing help off the field. He was down in the end zone for quite a bit of time. It's and he was even wearing the Guardian cap. Terrifying scene. And so you're looking at injuries that have been a problem. Jaden Reed, great start to the season. Quite frankly, he just disappeared down the stretch. And then I mentioned with Wicks, the drops were an issue, and that's, I think, correctable. Hell, Davante Adams had issues with drops early in his career, and he certainly figured it out. I'm not giving up on any of these guys, including Dontavian Wicks, but drops were an issue for him this year. So I'm not, I want to be clear, I'm not painting a picture that, the wide receiver room right now for Green Bay is a bad wideout room. It's not. It's a good wide receiver room. It could use, I'm going to go back to that word. It could use an alpha. I think it would I think if you have a guy like Davante Adams in this wide receiver room, Romeo Doubs looks a hell of a lot more scary to an opposing defense as a number 2 wide receiver than a number 1. And Christian Watson looks a hell of a lot more scarier as a number 2 wide receiver behind someone like Davante Adams than he is as a 1. You have to think about what bringing in a guy like a Davante Adams would do for the rest of the wide receiver room. Because right now when defenses are preparing for the Packers, there's all this depth, but they also know, Doubs is the number 1 option sometimes. Sometimes it's Watson, and usually it's those two. And Reed will get a lot of touches one game, and then the next game he's kind of phased out, and that's just how the game flow and the rhythm goes. But a guy like Davante Adams is going to get targets no matter what. He's going to get receptions, yards, touchdowns no matter what. And he's going to draw a hell of a lot of attention to the opposing defense, which will then in turn open up opportunities for Christian Watson to take the lid off a defense, for Romeo Doubs to work underneath and rack up 7 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown on any given week. It will help enhance the entire wide receiver room if you go out and get a true number 1 guy. Now, my one drawback, again, Mitch M on YouTube, please subscribe if you haven't already. We're flirting with the idea of bringing back Davante Adams to Green Bay, assuming the Jets release him outright, which I think is almost a foregone conclusion at this point, but certainly not a done deal yet. My one drawback, or my one point of hesitance within all of this, was his age. And then I went and I did some research because, I like to bring that to the table instead of just spewing a bunch of garbage. So Davante Adams turned 32 in December, and he's coming off an incredibly productive year. But I think once you hit 32, even 31, it just, in a wide receiver shelf life, 31, 32 like Davante is, it's starting to get old. It sounds crazy because 32 in the grand scheme of life is still so young, but we're talking about NFL career life. We're talking about the lifespan of an NFL career, and wide receiver is one of those positions where you want to try to stay young and you want to try to stay, ahead of the curve, I guess. And 32, it's not old, but it's certainly getting up there. And so what I did was I went back and I looked at a lot of the greats, and I'm talking about the greats at the wide receiver position throughout their career, because I think when it's all said and done, Davante Adams, I don't think he'll be up there with, he won't be regarded as like Jerry Rice, Randy Moss, Calvin Johnson, but he's going to be up there as a guy where during his playing career, you could make an argument many years Davante Adams was the best wide receiver in the NFL during his prime. And so I went back and I looked at some of the greats. And a couple one primarily that I really draw a comparison with, Larry Fitzgerald, who was incredible for the Arizona Cardinals, and Davante Adams. I think they're similar in many respects. And so I'm going to, in a way, throw out a lot of numbers here, but I'll try to make it clear, concise, and crisp for you. So Davante Adams, folks, turned 32 in December. And so 33 next December. And he'll have a few months under his belt as a 32-year-old wide receiver. Larry Fitzgerald, one of the greats, in his age 32 season, 145 targets, 109 receptions, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns. And you're like, wow, that's pretty damn good. Those numbers, 109 receptions, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, that's wide receiver 1 level stuff. Well, what about his age 33 season? At age 33, Larry Fitzgerald had a league-high 107 receptions. At age 33, he led the NFL with 107 receptions, 1,023 yards, 6 touchdowns. And even at age 34, 109 receptions, 1,156 yards, 6 touchdowns. Because if Davante Adams becomes a reality for the Packers, and can you imagine that reunion? At home games, they either announce the offensive starters or the defensive starters. Imagine Davante freaking Adams running out of that tunnel next year again in the green and gold. Oh my gosh. And maybe this is more wishful thinking than anything, but I do expect him to become a free agent. And the Packers clearly have a need at wide receiver for a top dog. And so there are pieces of the puzzle that fit together. Now, obviously, the Packers would be far from the only team trying to bring in Davante Adams if he does indeed become a free agent. But there's history there, there's familiarity there, and it does, on the surface, add up to a certain extent. And so you look at a guy like Larry Fitzgerald, he put up number 1 wide receiver numbers clearly at age 32, 33, and 34. One of my all-time favorite wide receivers growing up. My dad's an Indianapolis Colts fan, and so I watched a lot of Colts games growing up, even though I've been a Packer fan. We've had the Milwaukee Gold package in our family since before I was born. So my first Packer game, I was 6 years old. Obviously, I was hooked then. So it's kind of weird. Like, I think a lot of sons probably have the same favorite teams as their dad. My dad's a Colts fan, but he is a Packers fan too, obviously just from going to games. But I've always been a Packers fan, but I watched a lot of Colts game growing up. I loved Marvin Harrison. I think he is, again, he's not in that top tier of wide receivers of all time, maybe not the second tier, but he's hovering around, tier 3, 4, 5, somewhere around there. Marvin Harrison, age 32, 86 receptions, 1,113 yards, 15 receiving touchdowns, age 33 season, 82 receptions, 1,146 yards, league high 12 touchdowns, most in the NFL at age 33. And in his age 34 season, 95 receptions, 1,366 yards, 12 touchdowns. And the last name I want to throw out there, it's a polarizing name, and it's a guy who, heck, I think he could still go out there and maybe have 30 or 40 catches even in his 40s right now. Terrell Owens. Age 32 season, Terrell Owens only played 7 games. He was banged up. At age 33, Terrell Owens had 85 catches, 1,180 yards, and an NFL high 13 touchdowns. Age 34, 81 catches, 1,355 yards, 15 touchdowns. And at age 35, T.O. had 69 receptions, 1,052 yards, and 10 touchdowns. At age 35. Those are some of the greats. Davante will go down as one of the greats. And they proved in their later years, age 32, 33, 34, 35, Larry Fitzgerald, Marvin Harrison, T.O., and those are just 3 examples. I looked up plenty of the other greats, and they were doing the same damn thing. Point is, one of my reservations when I saw Davante Adams, and I watched the whole interview on the Up and Adams show, and I was like, ooh, this is interesting now. This is fascinating. One of my major drawbacks was he is 32, and for a wide receiver, that's getting up there. So what does it look like for some of the other all-time greats at the position once they get to that age? Because, again, if the Packers If this ever came to fruition, really whoever signs Davante Adams, assuming again he becomes a free agent, it's going to be for a 2-year, 3-year deal. You're not giving him a 5-6-year deal. Even a 4-year deal seems outrageous, I think, at age 32. And history has shown us that some of the greats, a lot of them, produced clear-cut wide receiver 1 type numbers at age 32, 33, 34, and 35. And for Davante, the one thing that I'll bring up, on top of everything else, I've said this before, and I've heard this line used in many different, situations. Sometimes the best ability is availability. Davante's as durable as it gets. He really is. He's always out on the field. He's always available. And you saw him this year. Like, there's plenty of gas left in the tank. And one sort of frightening thing with this current wide receiver group is injuries have been a problem at times, and it's uncontrollable. Like, Watson didn't want to blow out his knee. Romeo with 2 concussions in a pretty short, condensed amount of time. I mean, the dude's even wearing a Guardian cap, and he still got a concussion. Davante has just shown he's durable. He's as durable as it gets at the position. And we all believe, right, that Green Bay has a championship window that's currently open. Like, that championship window's open. They've made the playoffs in Jordan Love's first 2 years. I know this season ended on quite a bit of a dud. 3 straight losses, including one of the Bears. It snapped an 11-game win streak against them. You lost to Minnesota, and then you put up 10 points in a 22-10 loss against Philadelphia, where the defense showed up, and they showed out, and they gave you every chance to win, and the offense just couldn't figure it out. They couldn't solve the riddle of Vic Fangio's defense. But going forward, I think most would say, yes, this is a Packers team that it should be realistic to enter next season saying, hey, they can compete to win the NFC. Are they on the level of Detroit right now? No. Are they on the level of Philadelphia? I would say no. But San Francisco, I would expect to rebound as well. And there's other teams to worry about. The Rams, as long as Stafford and McVay are there, they probably aren't going anywhere. What do the Vikings do after their collapse in the playoffs, at quarterback? But are they going to be in the mix? What is Dallas going to do? Is Dak going to be back? Who's their head coach going to be? There's plenty of teams in the mix, but Green Bay's right there as far as, they should be expected to be a contender in the NFC. And so if that's the case and you have if you have a need at wide receiver 1, why would you not explore this if your former all-pro wide receiver becomes a free agent? And I know there's a lot of buzz around the name T. Higgins, and I'll have a video about that in the offseason as well, probably more than one. And the main convincing factor for many may be that T. Higgins is in the prime of his career, and he does fit age-wise in perfectly with how this offense is currently constructed by Goody and the rest of the brain trust for the Packers. Like, T. Higgins would be a seamless fit into the offense. I love T. Higgins. If that's the route they went, I'd be all for it. Like, I would. I'd be all for it. My only thing with T. Higgins is if we're talking about availability, it's a guy who's missed 10 of a possible 34 regular season games in the last 2 years. You're talking about a guy that's missed nearly a third of the regular season games. Davante, for one reason or another, the dude's always healthy. He's always available. He's always on the field. And I do want to make one comparison here because I brought up age. Davante Adams this year, this is the last time I'm going to throw numbers your way. Davante Adams this year at 141 targets. Think about that. Between the Raiders and Jets, Davante Adams at 141 targets. Dontavian Wicks led the Packers with 76, so Davante had nearly double that. Davante finished the season with 85 receptions. Team high on the Packers was Jaden Reed with 55. Davante finished the season with 1,063 yards. Team high for the Packers was Reed with 857. Tucker Kraft, I know he's a tight end. He led the Packers with 7 receiving touchdowns. Davante had 8. Davante's still putting up wide receiver 1 numbers. Imagine those numbers fitting in with what Green Bay already has in place at wide receiver. It'd be incredible. And I would love the T. Higgins option. That's a different convo for a different day. Keep in mind, if that's the route you go, you're going to be giving T. Higgins a longer contract worth way more money. And I love T. Higgins. But again, he's missed 10 out of a possible 34 regular season games the last 2 years. Now, a lot of that is just guessing and projecting, and T. Higgins could go out next year and play all 17 games, and if he's not back in Cincinnati, he's a wide receiver 1 wherever he goes. He's incredible. I just think the Davante reunion makes sense. The timeline still fits. They need that wide receiver 1. You can get him on a 2 or a 3 year deal, again, assuming the Jets release him at some point this offseason. And just imagine that reunion. Oh, my goodness. Imagine him running out of the tunnel at Lambeau Field for his first game back in the green and gold. It'd be incredible. And availability to me is critical, and he has proven to be one of the most durable wide receivers in the National Football League, not for a short stretch. That sample size is large for Davante Adams, where year in and year out, that dude's playing 15, 16, 17 games in the regular season, and if you make the postseason, he's always right there with you. So it's an interesting topic. I'm all for it, again, under the idea that it wouldn't be a trade. It would be Davante being a free agent. We'll have to see. It's one of many offseason videos we'll have. It's relevant because of his interview earlier on Tuesday on the Up and Adams show. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate all the support. We'll see you next time.